Hey up guys, I want to show you a new way to get your head around understanding key. The traditional way of understanding key is given in a linear format. What do I mean by a linear format? If we take a key and we're going to look at something like, say, C major for instance, we know that C major, the basic ingredients for the C major key come from the C major scale. So we get C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then if we want to think we can get back to a C again there. That's really just the first note again. I always say the easy way to understand this is just to memorize this, and that is the Roman numeral values for these notes here. What we do is we take these notes, these single notes, and we can turn them into triads or chords, if you want to think of them in that way, by simply adding the Roman numeral value underneath them. So if we go like this, that's going to be called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is chord 7, and then you can see we get back to chord 1 there. But the thing to note about this is these Roman numerals, uppercase denotes a major tonality, lowercase with the dots, that means it's a minor tonality. So this is C major. So I don't have to amend any of this letter here. But look at the D. Because this is minor, what I have to do is I have to put a little M next to it there. That says D minor. Sometimes it might say D min, it might say D minor in full, but DM there, the little M means minor. Look at this one, chord 3. We can see that we get the dots and it's lowercase, so that means it's going to be a minor tonality. Very easy, guys. You just write out the major scale, you apply the Roman numerals underneath it, and then you can work out the tonality based on the uppercase or the lowercase of the Roman numeral. You can see here chord 4 is going to be major, chord 5 is going to be major as well. Chord 6, it's got lowercase there, so it's going to be minor. Chord 7, now this is an interesting one, is this, because this has got this little circle here which denotes that we are using something called diminished tonality. We have a diminished sound. So whenever we see that circle, we think diminished. And that is relating to the 5th of this chord. This is the only one that goes a bit wonky because these guys here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, these all have perfect fifths. But this one here, this one has a diminished fifth. So we have to show that by putting that little circle there. However, if you notice, it's in lowercase, so that means that the third in that chord is a minor third. This has got a major third, minor third, minor third, major third, minor third, minor third. So you can see there's a relationship in those Roman numerals. If you get a book and they write the Roman numerals like this, it's useless because you are losing key information. They are not retaining the tonality of the Roman numeral. It's very important to use that. And when I switch into using this for the minor, then you will see that this way of writing your Roman numerals is super important because we can also retain scale degree information by how we write out the Roman numerals. So you can see here we have got these Roman numerals, we've got the chords, we've worked that lot out there. What we can also do is we can use some other symbols. Like we used this circle here for diminished, we can use a triangle here to denote major tonality. So we can say that is major. And we can also use a minus here to say that it is minor. And we haven't got it in here. We're not going to use this in this example here, but just to be complete, if I have a plus there, then that is an augmented sound. These symbols become super useful to know. Now what I can do is I can apply these here to my chords. So I could say that's a major chord, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. You can see I get those 7 chords. This is just a repeat of the first one. Now the next thing to understand, and this is with every major key. So this is the major key. With every major key, there are 3 major chords or triads, and there are 3 minor chords or triads as well. So there's 3 of each. The first ones here, these guys, 1, 4, and 5, they're called primary triads. So if you're doing any music theory in school, then you will have to learn this stuff. If you're going to do any music theory exams, you're going to have to understand these terms. Primary triads, it's super important. Now because these are the most important ones, and that's only because the first chord is major, and that's grouping them all together, you can see that the primary triads in the major key are major. Makes sense. Then these guys here are going to be called the secondary triads. And then what we do is we get here, we get wobbly bob. That's the odd sounding chord, that's the leading note chord, and that's going to be your diminished triad. triad that just lives there in chord 7. Now, one of the things that's always perplexed me is explaining this in this linear fashion. You can see that what we do is we take the information and we put it out in a line like that. We can do exactly the same thing with the minor. Now, let me explain the minor to you. If I take chord 6, it's the easiest way to think about it. Chord 6 becomes the most important chord for the minor key. This is the major key, remember? Chord 1, that would be C major. If I take chord 6 and knock this down here, I get another linear explanation. So we're going to have the key of A minor. Now, you might think that these two have nothing in common, but they actually do. They are derived from each other. A minor is the same as C major. If you want to think of them as being two sides of the same coin, if I take this here, A, and if I just take the alphabet letters and I'll just show you how I'll work through this. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, back to A again. Now, if I take off those notes, you can see that my C major just starts there, and I could carry that stream of letters on and go A, B, C, and I would have my C major, because the minor is really just an inversion, if you will, of the major. It's an easy way to think of it in that context, but like I say, this is a linear explanation, and this is going to be a linear explanation as well. If you are enjoying my lessons here on YouTube, you might consider supporting my work on the channel and purchasing my ultimate guitar lesson book, which has got 80 lessons that are here on my YouTube channel. Let's get back to the video. Let's put the Roman numerals under here, which is really important. Let's go 1. Do you see how I wrote that as a lowercase because it is minor? And that is going to tell me what I need to add to my letter name to turn that into a full chord. B is going to be the same as this. Oh, hang on, I left off that diminished there. So B is going to be diminished. I put 2. Notice it's still number 2. It's still chord 2, but I have to put that diminished symbol on there. This is where it gets critical. We really need to understand that chord 3 is really this chord here. And you can see that this is a major tonality. Let's make that major. But what we have to do is we have to make sure that we retain the scale formula information in the pattern as we go along. It's really easy as this, guys. If I write out the scale in the numeric format with the degrees like this, root second, flat third, fourth, fifth, flat 6, flat 7. That is the formula for the natural minor or the relative minor, because this minor here is relative to the C major here. You can see that we have this flat 3. What we want to do is we want to retain that information from that flat 3 in our Roman numeral. But what we also get to do is to denote the tonality there. So I'm going to call that a flat 3 chord. If anybody ever writes out the minor and they do it like this, they might even remember to do that there. They put like that. They're forgetting to tell you that it is a flattened third. That degree there, we get that tone and that semitone there, or step and half step. We've got to keep that information because that's going to become critical later on as we are visualizing this stuff on the fretboard. Let's look at this. We've got 1, 2, 3, chord 4. I can even look up here for the information. I'm going to come over here to chord 5. This is an E. Let me just hook up chord 4 and 5 here with their appropriate tonalities. D becomes D minor, E becomes E minor. That matches up here. Look, can you see they're exactly the same chords? F, we can see that that's a major tonality up there, but this is chord 6. If we put a chord 6 in a major tonality there with the serifs on the top of the Roman numerals there, we don't want to miss off this flat 6. We don't want to miss that. Add that onto your Roman numeral there and that will help you. Look at the chord flat 7 here. Yes, you guessed it. Look, there's the G there. Bring that down here. That is going to be chord 7, and let's put that flat on there to denote that that is also a major tonality. Worth noting, again, what we can do is we can put these tonalities symbols underneath. This is going to be minor, diminished, major, minor, minor, major, and major tonality symbols there, so we can memorize the sequence for the minor key as well if we want to. Something cool happens that's really useful for us to be able to see here that chords 1, 4 and 5 in the minor are the minor tonality. You could think of those as being the primary triads for the minor tonality. Not a common way of thinking about it, but it works because if you just remember that 1, 4 and 5 are the minor triads for the minor tonality. This is pretty cool. As you can see, we've got exactly the same chords, but this is a linear explanation. This is a linear way of looking at it. Now, I think that the way that we do stuff in life is everything has seasons. Everything is circular. We talk about cycle of thirds, we talk about cycle of fifths, we talk about cycle of fourths, but I want to introduce something that I came up with that makes it easy for me to understand key. You need to understand key. Remember guys, these letters here, they can swap out for any key whatsoever. You just need to know the key. You put, if it's a key of B flat, then you just amend that alphabet sequence there so that it all tallies up with the notes that are in the key of B flat. That will tally across here into the minor. But what I want to do is I want to show you something. I call this the diatonic tonality cycle. What we're doing is we're escaping this idea of this linear movement through a key, because what it does is it terminates and it leaves you with a brick wall in your thinking. This is what I call tonal synonyms, and it simplifies completely how you think about music. It removes the confusion from the idea of what modes are, from what pattern you play on what chord, the whole shebang. It really does. This way of thinking about it as synonyms is super useful, and this is going to be the first way that I'm going to show you to understand it. We're going to do this thing that I call the diatonic tonality cycle. As you can see, these chord names are all the same, but the Roman numerals changed, but the associated tonalities with the chord stay with it. So look at this A minor. You can see, although the Roman numerals changed, the tonality is the same. There's A minor. The Roman numeral is different to this one because it's switching function, because what we're doing is we're thinking of it as being a synonym. It's another way of seeing exactly the same chord, like an enharmonic equivalent. If you think about it, F sharp is also G flat. We don't need to think too much about that. Why not do it with Roman numerals as well? To get the tonality cycle, what we have to do is we have to just plot this out. I want to plot out this C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. You can see that this contains the major scale, and then if I come from A to A, that contains the minor scale. They're exactly the same notes, they're just repeating. If we want to think about it, look, going from here, C to C, that's going to be major. And if we go from A to A, then that's going to be minor. We could think of it in that context because we know that it goes major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. Then what we can do is we can add those onto there. So D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, B diminished, C, D minor, E minor, and then we get to F, G, then we get back to A minor again. This plots out all those chords there. Let me put the Roman numerals underneath. What we can do is we can see that we're going to get 2 Roman numeral values for each of these chords. So this is chord 1, this is chord 2, this is chord 3, this is chord 4, chord 5, chord 6, squeeze that in there, chord 7, and then you can see we're back to chord 1 again. However, if we're in the minor, we can see that we get chord 1, chord 2, which is diminished, chord 3, which has got that flattening on it, chord 4, chord 5, chord 6 with the flattening, chord 7 with the flattening on there, and you can see we get back to chord 1. So as we go through this, you can see that C here is also, if you want to think of it in the minor, is known as the flat 3. So this is the synonym. We're thinking of this. Chord 1 in the major is the same as chord flat 3 in the minor. Hopefully you're still with me here, guys. It's quite a complex thing to get your head around, but once you understand it, then it will make sense because we're thinking of things in synonyms. And the reason this is important is if I know this is chord 1, I know I play a major scale pattern on this chord where I find this chord. Ties in with all the grids. Look at this one. Flat 3, I would play exactly the same scale shape. I would play exactly the same arpeggio, exactly the same chord shape. It doesn't matter. I just need to understand these synonyms here. D minor, we can see that the D minor is actually chord 4 in the minor, and that would make sense because that's flat 3. I have chord 4 there, same tonality, but there is the synonym for that spelling. So we can switcheroo between those two. E minor, guess what? That's going to be chord 5. This becomes critical when we want to change other types of chord voicings here, because chord 5 is pretty malleable what we can do with it. Remember, chord 4 in the major is the same as chord flat 6. You can see there, look, chord flat 6 in the minor. Then what we do is chord 5 is the same as flat 7. So you're starting to see how this is all changing. Chord 6, we already plotted that in there, so you can see that chord 6 is the same as chord 1, and you can see that when we get to this B diminished, that chord 7 diminished is the same as chord 2 diminished. And this gives us that synonym way of thinking about these chords. Like I say, this is linear. If you understand it in the linear fashion, then you can understand it in the cyclical fashion that I'm just about to show you. I will get there. Just like I use the cycle of thirds as a way of joining up the tertiary movement of the notes within a key to be able to extend those into triads, sevenths, ninths, 11ths and 13ths and all those expensive sounding chords, then we can do a similar thing with the tonality for this key. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look and I'm just going to label this as major. This is going to be the starting point. This is going to be 12 o'clock on the clock and we're going to think of this as being chord 1. But what we have is we have a synonym for that, and the synonym that we're going to have is that this is going to also be known as chord flat 3. So this is chord 1 in the major, but it's also synonym wise chord flat 3 in the minor. So we have both values there. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to include the tonality, and there's the tonality, so we know that is major. Now I'm going to box this off because we know that it's chord 1. If you understand the structure of your major scale, you know that what we have to do is we have to go up a whole step, or if you want to think of it in UK terms, it's a tone. So we go up a tone and that gets us to chord 2. Now in the major key, if we go up, chord 2 is going to be minor, but what we need to know is, and I'll put that there, so it's a minor chord there, and we could also put the little symbol there to show that it's minor, but we can also add this synonym spelling as well. So this is going to be chord 4 in the minor. So what we've done, we've taken that up there, so that's minor, major, minor. Let's go up to the next one. We're going to go up a whole step, and that takes us to chord 3, which we know in this minor here, major, minor, minor, that's for the major key. We're working this round here as if we're playing in the major key. This is going to be chord 5. We know this is going to be minor. I don't even have to write minor. I'm just going to show you that that's the major for the major key, the start of the major key if you want to. That is referencing that chord 1 there. So I don't even need to write that. I can put the symbol underneath. That will be useful because then we can remember major, minor, minor. Remember when I talked about that sequence of remembering the major key, it goes major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. We're going to go major, minor, minor. Guess what's next? It's going to be major. So if we're going up to the major, what we have to do is we go up a half step, and that's going to bring us to a major chord. This is going to be chord 4 in the major, but if we remember, chord 4 in the major is also known as a flat 6 chord. This is major tonality, so let's write that there. That's going to be a major sound. You can see we've gone step, step, half step, and that's taken care of the first 4 chords. Let's move on up here, and we're going to go up a step because this is the way it works. It goes step, step, half step. You might know your major scale as it goes whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, or tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. You can think of it in that kind of formula there. Next chord, we've got chord 4. We're going to move to chord 5 of the major key, which is uppercase there. That is going to be chord flat 7. We can refer to that here. Look, there's chord 5. It's also known as flat 7 in the minor key. So including this major and minor key information, we can access this synonym identity for these chords. That's a major tonality. Important because this is chord 5 as well in the major, that this is quite flexible. It starts off major, but it can do other things. So next step we need to do is literally a step. You can see we go whole, whole, half, whole, whole. That's going to get us to chord 6 in the major, which is also known as, look, it's also known as chord 1 in the minor. This means we have to really stop here and take notice. This is going to be minor, and we can label it as our minor key because what we're doing is we're referencing that minor chord 1. So let's pull a little shape around there so we can see that these things are all one and the same. So that's the minor key. Wonderful. Let's move on to the next one. What we have to do now is we have to go up a whole step again. So this step then, chord 6 leads us to chord 7, which is that odd, funky, diminished sounding chord. But in the minor, remember that as being chord 2, because look, there's chord 1, there's chord 2 that follows it. And this bad boy here, remember, it's got that diminished symbol. So let's just put that extra on there just so that we know that it's diminished. Because what we can do is we can look at this, we can go major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. You can see that what happens is with another half step up here, we get back to our major that we started off with. But what's important is this tonality cycle, and this is why I call it a cycle, because it just goes round. We have included the major and the minor information all in one handy circle. Instead of thinking linear, we can think circular. What that means is that when we think about things like modes, major here, chord 1, we can also think of it as being Ionian. That's the pattern that we would play. Even if we were in a minor key, we would still play Ionian pattern based on the flat third of the minor key. Let's look at this one, chord 2. We think of that as Dorian. This is synonym thinking, guys. It's really important. If you get your head around it, you can conquer all your scales, all your harmony really easily. So chord 3, this is Phrygian. You're in the minor key, you're in A minor, and you find out using the grid, say for example, where chord 5 is. Chord 5 is E minor. You play an E Phrygian pattern. You just play the Phrygian pattern. That's using the scale formulas. The next one here, chord 4, we can think of this modally as Lydian. Chord 5, we think of this as being Mixolydian. Chord 6, this has got a few names. This is one of those confusing things. We can think of it modally as being Aeolian. That's the modal name. That's a fancy Greek name for it. We can also think of it as being the natural minor. Now I think of it as being the natural minor because you find it naturally in the major key without making any modifications. We can also think of it as being the relative minor because that's what it is. It's relative to the key of C major. So it's relative to a major key. And actually, a bit of a funny way of thinking about it, if I just come back to this diagram here, I think of the chord 3 in the minor as being the relative major. There. That's the relative major. This is the relative minor. So chord 6 here, relative, if I can write that out, relative minor. And this here is going to be the relative major. I would really suggest working it out linear, but then trying to mold it into your head so that you can get this synonym way of thinking as well. So we've got the Aeolian. For the sake of completion, let's get to chord 7, which we know as Locrian. There you can see we've got the modal name for that. So we can think of this when we play chord 7, which is this diminished chord, we would be thinking Locrian. But if we're in the minor key and it's minor key chord 2, we would play the same pattern. We would think a Locrian pattern. I'm going to do more ways of understanding how these modal patterns come about and how you can use them in future lessons. There will be a PDF in the description. Go into the description there and download that. That's a free one. Grab that PDF. Notice I didn't put any keys in there, did I? I didn't put C major. I didn't put any D minors. So this applies to all keys. This is something I call the diatonic tonality cycle. Hopefully it'll help you to understand key, guys. Thanks for watching.